On the freezing, pitch-black night of December 29th, 1916, the richest man in the Russian Empire was sitting in this snow-covered courtyard in St. Petersburg.
Right, just staring down at a corpse.
Exactly, staring down at a corpse. And according to this man, the body at his feet had just survived consuming enough cyanide to kill a horse.
Right.
It had survived being shot in the chest. It had supposedly risen from the dead, choked its would-be assassin, and burst out into the winter, night before finally being brought down by this hail of gunfire.
Yeah, it is arguably the most famous murder story of the 20th century.
Oh, absolutely.
The peasant mystic,
Yeah.
the dark sorcerer of the Romanov court.
Yeah.
The man who simply could not be killed.
Right. But, and this is why we're here today, when the Tsar's leading forensic scientist actually opened that corpse up a few days later, he found something that completely rewrites that whole cinematic narrative.
Completely rewrites it.
Yeah. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of historical and forensic sources that deconstruct the life and the incredibly mythologized death of Grigori Rasputin.
It's quite a story.
It really is. And we have a very specific mission for you listening today. We are going to separate the man from the monster movie. We're going to look at the actual autopsy, the biological reality of a devastating royal illness, and this tragic medical irony that literally changed the course of history.
Because the reality of Rasputin is, it's actually much sadder and vastly more consequential than the myth.
Yeah, totally.
We aren't dealing with a supernatural demon here. We're dealing with an uneducated Siberian peasant who accidentally helped bring down a 300-year-old dynasty.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Simply by being in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time with the wrong medical advice.
Right. And as we go through this, we want to explore a bigger question about human nature, really. Like, why do we so often prefer a supernatural monster story over the messy reality of a collapsing political system?
That's the core of it, really.
Yeah, like when the walls start caving in, why do we desperately want a sorcerer to blame?
Right.
But to figure that out, we have to start long before that freezing night in the courtyard. We have to figure out how a man like Rasputin even crossed the threshold of the most exclusive, heavily guarded palace on Earth.
Yeah, and to understand that journey, you have to picture where he started, which is a place called Pokrovskoye.
Okay.
This is a tiny, incredibly isolated village in western Siberia. He was born there around 1869.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say he was a muzik, a Russian peasant, we really need to understand what that actually meant in the late 19th century.
Right, because we throw the word peasant around a lot in history, like it just means someone who isn't rich. But the reality of a Siberian muzik is a very specific, very harsh kind of existence.
Completely. I mean, we were talking about extreme subsistence living, generations of families just tied to this freezing, unforgiving land.
Mm-hmm.
The legacy of serfdom was still this massive cultural shadow over everything. Rasputin grew up incredibly poor, working the earth. He was largely unlettered for most of his early life.
Wow.
And by the standards of the glittering imperial court in St. Petersburg, a muzik was essentially viewed as, part of the local flora and fauna.
Like livestock almost.
Pretty much. He wore rough, homespun clothes. He smelled of the stable and the soil.
Which makes the label that everyone knows him by, the Mad Monk, so historically inaccurate based on the source.
Oh, totally inaccurate.
They're very firm on this. He was never a monk. He never took any vows.
Right. He never took holy orders. He was never ordained by the Orthodox Church. And he definitely never lived in a monastery as a monk.
Right.
What the historical record actually shows is that sometime in his late 20s, he experienced this profound, transformative religious awakening.
Okay.
He left his wife and children in Pokrovskoye for long periods to become a stranik.
A wandering pilgrim.
Yes, a self-taught holy man. He would literally walk, often barefoot or in these crude shoes, across the massive, sprawling geography of Russia.
Just walking everywhere.
Yeah, visiting monasteries, surviving completely on the charity of strangers. He engaged in deep ascetic practices, fasting and praying for days.
Now, to the modern ear, a guy abandoning his family to walk across the country sounds, eccentric or even deeply irresponsible.
Oh, for sure. But in the context of Imperial Russia, it wasn't viewed that way at all. It was a highly recognized, deeply respected archetype.
Interesting.
The Russian Orthodox world had this long-standing tradition of revering the starets,
The elder.
the holy elder, exactly. And the crucial mechanism to understand here is the cultural belief that spiritual purity was found in suffering and simplicity.
Okay.
The Russian peasant masses and even elements of the church genuinely believed that an unpolished, suffering, illiterate wanderer was fundamentally closer to the divine than a wealthy, heavily educated bishop wearing, robes woven with gold thread.
So the dirt was essentially proof of authenticity.
Exactly, the dirt proved you were real.
So he builds this reputation over years of wandering. He gains a following, he learns the scriptures orally, and eventually his path leads him out of the provinces and into St. Petersburg.
The absolute epicenter of Russian imperial power.
Right. And the timing of his arrival is vital here. He walks into a society that is uniquely, almost desperately primed for him.
Oh, the fin de siècle atmosphere of St. Petersburg in the early 1900s was just a very strange place.
Yeah.
You have this highly educated, incredibly wealthy, aristocratic elite. But they are living through a period of massive, really unsettling change. Industrialization is moving rapidly. The political ground is shaking.
A 1905 revolution had just happened, right?
Exactly. So there's this pervasive sense of alienation.
Because they are completely disconnected from the actual country they rule.
Yes. And their response to that alienation wasn't to go out and, meet the peasants or reform the government.
Mm-hmm.
Their response was this massive, sweeping obsession with mysticism.
The occult.
The occult, yes. Seances, spirit mediums, table turning. The elite were actively searching for something that felt spiritually authentic to anchor them in all this chaos.
It's funny, the analogy that jumps out from the sources is so relevant to today. You look at modern billionaires or high-profile celebrities who have access to literally every luxury on the planet.
Right.
But they feel hollowed out by their own wealth. So what do? They fly in some obscure barefoot wellness guru to a private retreat in Davos or Malibu.
Exactly.
They want to consume the aesthetic of spiritual purity and groundedness without actually having to give up their wealth or live in poverty themselves.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
When Rasputin arrives in St. Petersburg, he is the ultimate authentic experience for these bored, anxious aristocrats.
Right.
He brings this intense, very real human magnetism. The historical accounts universally focus on his eyes, pale, piercing eyes that just seem to lock on to you.
And he didn't care about court protocol at all.
Right. Not even a little bit. He would walk into a drawing room full of duchesses and speak to them with the blunt, fussy authority of a Siberian farmer.
And high society just eats it up. They treat him like this fascinating, exotic party trick.
They loved it.
But that novelty phase doesn't last long, because for the most powerful woman in the empire, Rasputin very quickly transitions from a curiosity to a matter of absolute life and death.
Yes, because behind the gold and the marble of the Winter Palace, the Romanovs are hiding a terrifying state secret.
We have Tsar Nicholas II, the absolute autocrat of Russia, and his wife, Empress Alexandra, and they are living under a pressure that is almost impossible for us to comprehend today.
To understand Alexandra's mental state, you really have to understand her position.
Yeah.
She is German by birth, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
Right, so she's an outsider.
Very much so. She's already viewed with deep suspicion by the Russian public. And the fundamental duty of an empress in this autocratic system is to produce a male heir. But she has 4 daughters first. The pressure builds for a decade. Finally, in 1904, she gives birth to a son, Alexei. The entire empire celebrates.
But the celebration turns into a nightmare almost immediately.
Almost instantly. Because Alexei inherited a disease through Alexandra's bloodline.
From Queen Victoria.
Yes, he had hemophilia.
And we really need to explain the biological mechanics of this to understand why it was such a pervasive terror for the family.
Right, hemophilia means the blood lacks the proteins necessary to clot. For a normal child, a bump on the knee while playing results in a minor bruise.
Yeah.
The capillaries break, a little blood leaks out, the blood clots, and it heals in a few days.
But for Alexei...
For Alexei, there is no clot. That minor bump triggers internal bleeding that simply does not stop.
Wow.
The blood continues to pour into the joint cavity, a condition called hemarthrosis. As the joint fills with blood, the pressure builds exponentially.
That sounds horrific.
It is. It stretches the joint capsule to the tearing point. It destroys the cartilage. The pain is not just a mild ache. It is agonizing, blinding pain that lasts for days or even weeks.
Oh my
His limbs would literally lock up, swelling to grotesque proportions.
And the parents just have to watch this happen, knowing any single fall could be the one that kills him, but they can't tell anyone.
Exactly. That is the political reality.
Because in an absolute autocracy, the strength of the state is entirely dependent on the perceived strength of the ruler and the clear line of succession.
Right.
If the public finds out the future czar could bleed to death from tripping on a rug, the dynasty looks incredibly fragile.
So Alexandra is trapped. She is isolated in her palaces, surrounded by a public that dislikes her, hiding this fatal secret.
Yeah.
And she's watching her child scream in pain while the absolute most expensive, highly educated doctors in the world stand around his bed and admit they can do absolutely nothing.
Which brings us to the ultimate crisis point. The year is 1912. The royal family is at their hunting lodge in Spala, which is in modern-day Poland.
Right.
Alexei is recovering from a minor injury, and they take him for a carriage ride. The carriage hits a bump, and that jolt triggers a massive internal hemorrhage in his thigh and groin.
It is the worst episode of his entire life. The hematoma is so large it begins pressing on the nerves. His leg draws up to his chest and locks.
Oh, wow.
The boy is delirious with pain, literally begging his mother to let him die. The fever spikes. The doctors examine him and make the grim calculation.
They give up.
They do. They inform Nicholas and Alexander that there is no medical hope. The internal bleeding cannot be stopped. The priest is brought in to administer the last rites.
And they even draft the death announcement, right?
Yes. The government actually drafts the official bulletin announcing the death of the heir to the throne. They were that certain he was going to die.
So the boy is dying. And in that moment of absolute total darkness, Alexander sends a frantic message to Rasputin. And he isn't even in the capital. He has been sent back to his village in Siberia.
Thousands of miles away.
Thousands of miles away.
He receives the telegram, and he sends a very brief, incredibly famous reply back to the Empress.
What does he say?
He says, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much."
And shortly after that telegram arrives, the bleeding stops.
It stops. The fever breaks. The boy survives.
And for Alexandra, this isn't a coincidence. This is absolute, unshakable proof that God has sent this Siberian peasant to be the solitary shield protecting her son.
It cemented a fanatic loyalty. From that moment on, Rasputin became untouchable in her eyes.
Okay, I have to stop right here and push back on behalf of everyone listening.
Sure.
Because we are talking about biology and physics.
Yeah.
A telegram sent from 2,000 miles away does not possess coagulant properties.
No, it does not.
We know this isn't a fantasy novel. So what is the medical reality here? How does a peasant in Siberia cure a massive internal hemorrhage?
It's the central mystery of the Rasputin story.
Yeah.
And historians and medical professionals have debated the mechanics of this for decades. We have to look at this through the lens of early 20th century medicine and human physiology. There are three main theories that rely entirely on science, not sorcery.
Okay, give me the physiological breakdown. What's the first one?
The first mechanism is the physiological effect of calm. We know exactly how the sympathetic nervous system responds to terror.
Right. The fight or flight response.
Exactly. When Alexandra is panicked, the entire household is panicked. The sick room is a chaotic environment of weeping parents and frantic doctors poking and prodding the boy.
And that stress triggers a massive release of adrenaline in Alexei.
Yes. His heart rate skyrockets, his blood pressure spikes.
And higher blood pressure means the blood is pumping faster and harder out of the broken vessels into the joint.
Exactly. It makes the bleeding worse. Now, when Rasputin was physically present during other episodes, his deep hypnotic calmness, his absolute certainty that the boy would be fine, calmed Alexandra.
Right.
And when the mother calmed down, the boy calmed down. His heart rate dropped. His blood pressure lowered.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, lower pressure reduces the force of the internal bleeding, giving the body a marginal chance to begin forming whatever weak clot it could.
Right, so just taking the temperature of the room down physically helps his vascular system.
Exactly.
And the second theory is related to that, right? The use of clinical hypnosis or strong suggestions specifically for pain management.
Right. Modern medicine fully accepts that deep hypnotic suggestion can alter the brain's perception of pain.
Sure.
If Rasputin could reduce Alexei's perception of his own agony, the boy's thrashing and stress would decrease, which again lowers the blood pressure.
But neither of those explain the 1912 Spala crisis, because Rasputin wasn't in the room, he was in Siberia, he just sent a piece of paper.
Right.
So we come to the third theory, and this is the core revelation of the entire deep dive. This is the medical irony that changes everything.
The aspirin theory.
Yes.
To understand this, we have to look very closely at the exact phrasing of Rasputin's advice. In the 1912 telegram, and consistently whenever he was at the palace, his primary directive to the empress was always the same.
Keep the doctors away.
Exactly. Do not let them bother him.
And why did the doctors need to be kept away? What were these brilliant, world-class physicians actually doing to Alexei?
They were trying to manage his excruciating pain, and to do that, they were utilizing what was at the time the absolute cutting edge of pharmaceutical science.
Okay.
A brand new wonder drug that had been synthesized by Bayer just a few years earlier, aspirin.
Wait. The doctors were giving a hemophiliac aspirin.
Yes, they were.
Break down the pharmacology here for the listener, because this is where the tragedy really locks in.
In the early 1900s, salicylic acid, which is the active component in aspirin, was hailed as a miracle for pain and fever reduction. Doctors across Europe were prescribing it for everything.
Right, it was the new wonder drug.
But what nobody knew, not the doctors in St. Petersburg, not the chemists in Germany, was the secondary mechanism of the drug.
They didn't know it was an antiplatelet agent.
Precisely. They did not understand the COX-1 enzyme pathway. They had no idea that aspirin actively inhibits the production of thromboxane A2, which is the exact chemical that tells blood platelets to stick together and form a clot.
Wow.
That anti-clotting mechanism wasn't even proven in a laboratory until 1971.
That is staggering. So the absolute finest medical minds in the Russian Empire, driven by a desperate desire to ease this child's suffering, were repeatedly administering a drug that actively prevented his blood from clotting.
Yes. They were pouring gasoline on a fire. They were unwittingly killing the heir to the throne.
And then you have Rasputin, a man with zero medical training, a man who likely didn't even know what a platelet was.
Right.
He tells the emperor, shoo the doctors away, and by doing that, he accidentally ceases the administration of a massive blood thinner.
Exactly. By simply removing the doctors, the aspirin stops, and the boy's body finally has a chance to stabilize on its own.
It is one of the most profound historical ironies on record.
It really is. The peasant didn't save the boy with magic. He saved the boy through pure, accidental ignorance of modern medicine.
He just happened to be less wrong than the smartest scientists in the room.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But the underlying mechanism doesn't matter to Empress Alexandra. The result is exactly the same to her. She banished the doctors. The boy lived.
Right.
To her, Rasputin is a living saint. And that medical accident locks in a fanatic dependency. Because she has to protect the man who protects her son, Rasputin's position inside the palace becomes totally unassailable.
He becomes a permanent fixture. And this creates a massive, dangerous vacuum of information.
Oh, so?
Because remember, the public doesn't know about the hemophilia. They don't know about the bleeding. So from the outside looking in, all the Russian public sees is a filthy, uneducated peasant who has somehow gained complete psychological control over the Tsar and Tsarina.
Which brings us to the phenomenon of the two Rasputins and the dense fog of political warfare. Because the man inside the palace and the man outside the palace are entirely different entities.
Completely different. Inside the palace, to the Romanovs, he played his role perfectly.
He was the holy man.
He was pious, gentle, and deeply comforting. He would sit with the family, pray with them, and speak in these soothing, folksy parables. He was their personal anchor to the Russian soil.
But outside the palace, the perception is a nightmare of depravity.
Oh, yeah.
He's viewed as a raging drunk, a relentless womanizer, a corrupt power broker, trading political favors for money and access to wealthy society women.
Now, as historians, we have to sift through the propaganda here. How much of the outside Rasputin was accurate?
Right, because there were rumors everywhere.
Actually, a significant portion was true. The police surveillance reports, because the secret police were watching him constantly, confirmed that he drank heavily.
Really?
Oh, yeah, often making huge scenes in public restaurants. He absolutely leveraged his position as a holy man to seduce women. He was deeply flawed and highly corruptible.
But the reality of his corruption wasn't enough for his enemies. They had to turn him into a monster.
Right. The political rivals at court, the conservative nobility who were terrified of his influence, began to manufacture and weaponize rumors on an industrial scale.
Yeah.
And the most damaging rumor was the religious one. They accused him of belonging to an illegal underground sect known as the Klisti.
Explain the Klisti sect, because this is where the rumors get really dark and specific.
So the Klisti were a real, albeit very marginal, radical offshoot of Russian Orthodoxy. Their theology centered on a concept that is deeply terrifying to mainstream religion.
Which is?
The idea of salvation through sin.
Wow.
The logic went like this. To truly repent, you must first truly sin. You cannot be saved unless you have fallen into the deepest pits of depravity.
So they would hold these secret rituals.
Yes, called radinai.
Yeah.
Ecstatic rituals involving flagellation, frenzied dancing, and eventually mass orgies.
And the rumor mill in St. Petersburg pushed the narrative that Rasputin was secretly a Khlisti master, holding these depraved rituals with the highest-ranking women in the capital. But the sources confirm he was never actually a member of this sect.
There is zero credible evidence he was ever Khliist, but the rumor was perfectly designed to destroy a holy man.
Right, it targets his brand.
Exactly. And it naturally bled into the most radioactive rumor of all, that he was the Empress's lover.
Which is, again, entirely false according to all the sources. Alexandra was incredibly prudish and deeply devoted to her husband.
Deeply devoted.
But as a political smear, it is a nuclear bomb. You have a German-born empress allegedly sleeping with a demonic peasant who is running an underground sex cult.
And this happens just as the geopolitical stability of the world completely fractures.
Yeah.
He did in 1914, and World War I begins.
Right. The Russian Empire goes to war against Germany.
And the war is a meat grinder for Russia.
It really is.
It's an apocalyptic catastrophe. The Russian military is vast, but it is deeply undersupplied. They are suffering from massive munitions shortages.
Like guys without guns.
Literally. Soldiers are being sent to the front lines without rifles, told to pick up the weapons of the men who fall in front of them. The casualties run into the millions.
And in the face of this disaster, in August 1915, Tsar Nicholas makes what might be the single most fatal political decision of his entire reign.
Oh, absolutely.
He decides to leave the capital, travel to the military headquarters at the front, and take personal, direct command of the Russian armed forces.
It was a decision driven by a sense of divine duty, but strategically,
Yeah.
it was suicide.
Why?
Because by taking personal command, Nicholas stripped away the buffer between the crown and the military failure. Every single lost battle, every supply failure, every mass casualty event was no longer the fault of a general. It was directly the fault of the Tsar.
But the domestic fallout is even worse. Because the Tsar is essentially abandoning the government in St. Petersburg, and who does he leave in charge?
Empress Alexandra, the deeply unpopular German-born empress, who the public already suspects of being a traitor, secretly working for the Kaiser, and standing right behind her, whispering in her ear, is Grigori Rasputin.
This period is known in Russian history as the ministerial leapfrog. Explain how this actually functioned. How was a peasant dictating policy?
Well, the mechanical reality is that Nicholas was at the front, so Alexandra was communicating with him via a constant stream of letters.
Okay.
Rasputin would give Alexandra his quote-unquote spiritual advice on who should be appointed to key government posts.
And she would pass that on.
Right. Alexandra will write to Nicholas, framing these suggestions as messages from God or from our friend.
And Nicholas just went along with it.
Nicholas, who is exhausted and very deferential to his wife, would just rubber stamp them.
And the result is chaos.
Utter chaos. Think of the Russian government during a world war as a massive train hurtling down a mountain. The ministerial leapfrog meant they were changing the conductor every 5 minutes.
Wow.
Over the course of 16 months, Russia went through 4 prime ministers, 5 ministers of the interior, 3 ministers of foreign affairs, and 3 ministers of war.
That's insane.
Men were appointed simply because they fawned over Rasputin and fired the moment they crossed him.
Imagine the psychological impact on the average Russian citizen. This is early 20th century fake news, but the stakes are literally life and death.
Yeah.
You're a peasant in the city. There's no bread in the bakeries. Your sons are being slaughtered on the front lines. And you open a newspaper or see a pamphlet on the street featuring a cartoon of Rasputin as a towering giant puppeteer.
Yes, those cartoons were everywhere.
And he's holding the tiny Tsar and Tsarina in his enormous hands like little wooden marionettes.
The perception becomes reality. The public genuinely believes that a lecherous, illiterate sorcerer has brainwashed the royal family and is intentionally driving the empire off a cliff.
Right.
The sacred, centuries-old autocracy hasn't just failed, it's become a grotesque national joke.
The monarchy is hemorrhaging its own legitimacy. The body politic is dying. And Rasputin is the most visible, festering symptom of that disease. Which leads us directly to a group of men who decide that the only way to save the patient is to perform a violent amputation.
And we really need to look closely at this conspiracy, because it fundamentally alters our understanding of the Russian Revolution.
How so?
Well, when we talk about the assassination of Rasputin, modern audiences often assume it was carried out by Bolsheviks or communist revolutionaries trying to tear down the empire.
But it wasn't. The conspirators were the biggest fans the monarchy had.
They were die-hard, blue-blooded monarchists. They weren't trying to destroy the system, they were trying to save it.
Let's profile the hit squad. Who are we talking about?
The ringleader is Prince Felix Yusupov. He is heir to the largest fortune in Russia, arguably wealthier than the Tsar himself.
Wow.
He is Oxford-educated, incredibly vain, known for his fluid sexuality and his absolute disdain for anyone beneath his social station. And he is married to Tsar Nicholas's own niece.
So he is intimately connected to the royal family.
Extremely. Next you have Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, who is the Tsar's first cousin.
Literally a member of the royal family.
Exactly. And the third key figure is Vladimir Purishkevich. He is a member of the Duma, the parliament, but he is fiercely right-wing.
Okay.
He is a founder of the Black Hundreds, an extreme nationalist anti-Semitic group. He recently gave a fiery 2-hour speech in the Duma directly attacking Rasputin's influence.
So these men look at the collapsing state of the country, the ruined reputation of the royal family, and they arrive at a staggering conclusion.
Yeah, that the political system is so completely broken, so paralyzed by this one peasant, that their only constitutional recourse is back-alley murder.
Right. They believe they have to step outside the law to save the law.
It is the ultimate symptom of systemic failure. When literal royalty and high-ranking politicians decide the only way to enact a policy change is to lure a man into a basement and kill him, your government is already dead.
So the setup. It's the night of December 29th, 1916. Yusupov lures Rasputin to the Moika Palace under the pretense of meeting Yusupov's beautiful wife, Irina.
Who, by the way, isn't even in the city.
Right. Rasputin arrives, and he is led down into a renovated cellar. We have finally reached the courtyard scene from the intro.
But this is where our mission requires us to pause. Because for 100 years, the world has listened to the story told by the men who pulled the trigger.
Right.
Today, we're going to ignore the assassins and listen to the medical science. We're going to put the legend right next to the autopsy.
Let's walk through the legend one more time just to establish the baseline. According to Yusupov's account, Rasputin is sitting in the cellar. Yusupov offers him a plate of pink French pastries and glasses of Madeira wine.
Right.
Both the cakes and the wine have been laced with enough potassium cyanide to kill several men. Rasputin eats the cakes, he drinks the wine, and he just smiles. The poison does nothing.
That's the story, yep.
Yusupov panics, goes upstairs, gets a revolver, comes back down, and shoots Rasputin in the chest.
And according to the myth, Rasputin falls, seemingly dead. But minutes later, as Yusupov leans over him, Rasputin's eyes snap open.
Like a horror movie.
Literally. He leaps up, foaming at the mouth, chokes the prince, and bursts out the door into the snowy courtyard. Purishkevich chases him, shoots him again.
And then they beat him.
Yeah, they beat him with a rubber club, wrap him in heavy canvas, drive him to the freezing Neva River, and shove him through a hole in the ice.
And the final flourish of the legend is that when the body was found, his hands were raised, proving he was still alive under the water, clawing at the ice.
It's an incredible story. It is tailor-made for a movie.
But where does that specific, detailed narrative actually come from?
It comes almost entirely from one single source. The memoirs of Prince Felix Yusupov, written in 1927 while he was living comfortably in exile in Paris.
This is essentially a bumbling criminal writing his own superhero origin story.
Pretty much.
He botches a simple mob hit, and to cover up his own incompetence, he turns his victim into a supernatural demon.
It is the perfect historical cover-up,
Oh.
because it feeds exactly what the public wants to believe. But the Tsar didn't rely on Yusupov's memoirs.
No, he wanted facts.
Right. When Rasputin's body was pulled from the river a few days later, Tsar Nicholas ordered a full, official forensic autopsy.
And this is where the myth falls apart completely.
The autopsy was conducted by Professor Dmitry Kusratov, a highly respected forensic pathologist. We have his findings, we have post-mortem photographs.
And Kosratov's scalpel surgically dismantled Yusupov's legend.
Absolutely.
Let's take the legend apart, piece by piece. Fact 1. The poison.
Kostov examined the stomach contents. He found absolutely zero trace of poison. No cyanide in the stomach, none in the liver, none in the blood.
Wait, none at all. So did he just not eat the cakes?
Rasputin's own daughter, Maria, later testified that her father suffered from hyperacidity and fundamentally hated sugary foods.
Oh, wow.
He would never have touched a plate of pink pastries. Furthermore, Dr. Lazovert, the conspirator who was tasked with lacing the food, confessed years later that he lost his nerve at the last minute.
Are you serious?
Yes, he couldn't bring himself to violate his Hippocratic oath and be an accessory to murder by poison.
So the cyanide was just, what, baking powder or aspirin?
Basically harmless powder, yeah.
The most famous defining element of the Rasputin legend, the poisoned cakes, is a complete fabrication.
It never happened.
Fact 2, the drowning in the freezing river, the clawing at the ice.
Kosaratov examined the lungs. They were completely clear. There was no water in his lungs.
So he didn't drown.
Rasputin did not drown. He was unequivocally medically dead before his body ever hit the freezing water of the Neva River.
But what about the raised hands? The clawing?
The raised hands that fueled the clawing at the ice myth. That was simply rigor mortis setting in as the body was contorted while being shoved through a narrow hole in the ice.
So if it wasn't poison and it wasn't the river, what actually killed the unkillable man?
Physics. Lead, 3 bullets.
It's bullets.
Kosaratov detailed 3 distinct gunshot wounds. 1 bullet entered the left side of his chest, passing through the stomach and liver. A second bullet entered his back, shattering his right kidney.
Which matches a scenario where he is shot in the cellar, tries to flee across the courtyard, and is shot in the back as he runs.
Exactly. But it is the third bullet that tells the true story of his death. Kosaratov documented a final, massive wound.
Where was it?
A bullet entered the exact center of Rasputin's forehead and exited the back of his skull. And crucially, Kosaratov noted powder burns and singed skin around the entry wound.
A contact shot.
A point-blank execution-style contact shot to the brain. That wound alone would have caused instant catastrophic death.
Wow.
There was no supernatural resilience. He didn't shrug off poison. He didn't rise from the dead.
Right.
He was shot in the cellar. He panicked and ran. He was shot in the back in the courtyard. He collapsed. And then someone walked up to him, pressed a gun to his forehead, and pulled the trigger to finish the botched job.
It wasn't a magical duel between good and evil at all. It was a squalid, terrifying, and utterly ordinary murder by incompetent aristocrats.
Very ordinary.
Now, regarding that final fatal headshot, I want to bring up something from the sources. The British theory.
Ah, the Oswald Rayner theory.
Right, because there is this historical speculation that an agent of British intelligence, a man named Oswald Rayner, who was a close friend of Prince Yusupov's from their days at Oxford, was actually present at the palace that night.
Yes.
The theory suggests that the British government was terrified that Rasputin was going to convince Empress Alexandra to sign a separate peace treaty with Germany.
Right.
If Russia pulled out of World War I, Germany could take all those troops from the Eastern Front and hurl them against the British and French on the Western Front.
Which would have been catastrophic for the Allies.
Exactly. So the theory goes that the aristocrats botched the assassination, and it was actually the British agent, Rayner, who stepped out of the shadows, walked up to Rasputin, and fired that precise professional contact shot to the head to ensure Russia stayed in the war.
It is a genuinely fascinating geopolitical thriller of a theory. It highlights the immense global stakes swirling around this single peasant.
I have to push back here, though. I've read through the sources, and while it's a great story, where is the actual documentary evidence? Is there any hard proof that a British agent pulled the trigger?
You are absolutely right to push back. As historians, we must draw a hard line between compelling theory and documented fact.
Right.
The evidence for Rayner firing the shot is entirely circumstantial. It relies on vague diary entries, the fact that he was in the city, and the forensics of the bullet caliber, which some argue matches a British Webley revolver.
But nothing concrete.
There is no smoking gun, no official MI6 confession. We must treat it as unproven speculation.
Okay.
What we do know for certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is what Professor Kosaratov documented. The unkillable monster was killed quite easily by 3 pieces of lead.
So, the monster's dead, the peasant has been eradicated. Did this desperate, bloody amputation save the patient? Did killing the sorcerer save the Russian Empire?
It didn't even buy them time. The immediate aftermath only highlighted the total dysfunction of the autocracy. The Tsar was furious that his own relatives had murdered a peasant in cold blood, bypassing whatever shred of law still existed.
But he couldn't just execute them, right?
No, he couldn't execute them because they were royalty. So he exiled Yusupov and Dmitri to remote provinces.
Which, in another massive twist of historical irony, ends up saving the assassins' lives.
Yes.
Because by kicking them out of St. Petersburg, the Tsar accidentally removes them from the blast radius of the incoming revolution.
Exactly. Yusupov survives, flees to Paris, and lives for decades off the fame of his own embellished legend. But for the Romanovs, The timeline of collapse is just staggering.
Walk us through it.
Rasputin's body is pulled from the ice in late December 1916.
And just 10 weeks later.
Yeah.
10 weeks. March 1917.
The bread riots begin in St. Petersburg. The military garrisons, who are sick of the slaughter of the war, refuse to fire on the crowds.
The mutiny.
They mutiny. The workers strike. The entire machinery of the state grinds to a halt. The generals and the politicians go to Nicholas and tell him the truth. You have lost the country.
And he's forced to abdicate.
He is. In 10 weeks, a dynasty that had ruled Russia for over 3 centuries simply evaporates.
And a little over a year after that, in July 1918, the end game arrives.
The tragic end.
The entire royal family, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 4 daughters, and little Alexei, the boy whose hemophilia started this whole tragic chain of events, are taken down into a cellar of their own in Yekaterinburg by Bolshevik guards and executed.
Which brings us to the most chilling postscript of this entire story, the prophetic letter.
Let's discuss this carefully. Rasputin allegedly wrote a letter to the Tsar shortly before he was murdered.
Yes. Now, the sources flagged this clearly. We must acknowledge that the exact wording of this letter may have been embellished over time or drafted after the fact by someone recognizing the eerie coincidence.
Right.
But it remains a core piece of the historical record, and its contents are haunting.
What did it say?
In the letter, Rasputin prophesied his own death. He wrote that if he were killed by ordinary men, by fellow peasants, the Tsar had nothing to fear. His dynasty would last for centuries.
But,
he warned, if he were murdered by the nobles, by the Tsar's own relatives.
then the nobles' hands would remain soiled with his blood for 25 years, they would flee the country, and the imperial family would not survive more than 2 years.
Exactly.
The entire Romanov lineage would be destroyed.
Whether he penned those exact words through some intuitive grasp of the political reality, or whether it's a retroactive embellishment, the historical timeline aligns with terrifying precision.
It really does.
The nobles murdered him in December 1916, and within 2 years, the Romanovs were wiped from the earth.
So we have to look back at the grand strategy of the assassins. If we analyze why this assassination failed so spectacularly to save the crown, the answer is brutally clear. They misdiagnosed the disease.
Completely. Rasputin was never the disease. He was merely the most visible symptom. Removing him didn't fix the underlying pathology of the empire. Murdering a peasant in a basement didn't magically produce munitions for the millions of soldiers dying in a catastrophic war.
It didn't reorganize the supply lines.
No, it didn't put bread in the bakeries of St. Petersburg. And most importantly, it didn't fix the deeply broken, out-of-touch machinery of an autocracy that was fundamentally incapable of managing a modern industrial 20th century crisis.
If anything, the assassination only accelerated the collapse.
Oh, without a doubt.
It proved to the entire country that the system was so fundamentally rotten that even the highest elite had to resort to back-alley murder to enact a policy change.
The autocracy lost its aura of divine right and just became a squalid mafia turf war.
It is an incredible journey we've mapped out today.
It really is.
We started with a wandering pilgrim in the freezing dirt of Siberia. We followed him into the most opulent palace on earth, brought there by the desperate terror of a mother trying to save her bleeding son. We uncovered the tragic medical irony of a cutting-edge aspirin prescription that accidentally cemented his power. We watched him become the ultimate political scapegoat during a world war, the victim of a chaotic government and weaponized fake news.
And finally, we saw his utterly ordinary, brutal murder get covered up by a magnificent, self-serving myth written by his own killer. And as we close this deep dive, I want you, the listener, to reflect on something that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Okay, what is it?
I want you to think about the psychological utility of the monster. Why did a shattered Russia in 1916, and why do we today so easily and eagerly buy into the legend of the unkillable Rasputin?
Because it's easier than facing reality.
Exactly. We love the legend of the Dark Sorcerer because it is deeply, profoundly comforting.
Comforting. How so?
Well, in our own lives and in our modern society, when something massive goes wrong, when a major corporation goes bankrupt, when a political movement collapses, when an institution fractures, we desperately want to find one single villain.
Right. We want an evil genius, a manipulator, a Rasputin to blame.
Because if the collapse is caused by one uniquely evil person, it implies that the problem is surgically removable.
Precisely. If the monster is the cause, then the solution is simple. We just have to fire that specific CEO, vote out that one politician, Cancel that one figurehead.
Or, in Yusupov's case, shoot the mystic in the cellar.
Kill the sorcerer, and the spell breaks. Everything goes back to normal.
But it saves us from having to look at our own complicity. It saves us from having to acknowledge that the system itself, the economy, the political structure, the culture, is structurally unsound.
That is terrifying to accept.
It is. It is terrifying to accept that the ship is sinking because the blueprints are flawed, rather than because one malicious guy drilled a hole in the hull.
Yeah.
As the fall of the Romanovs proved so tragically, assassinating the scapegoat never fixes the rot in the walls, because there was never any spell to break in the first place.
Look around the world today in our politics and our corporate spheres. Who are the Rasputins we are currently inventing? Who are the convenient villains we focus all our rage on, just so we don't have to face the harder truth that the systems we rely on are fundamentally broken?
Yeah, the heavy thought.
It's a heavy thought, but it's the real lesson of the Moika Palace cellar. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Until next time, keep questioning the myths.